Chairman Kinski, you're live.
Okay, this is Senate Appropriations Committee, Tuesday, January 24, 2023, noon, actually 1:15. Linda, call the roll.
Senator Anderson.
Aye, here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator Nethercott. Here. Senator Salzar.
Excused?
And Chairman Kinski.
Here. So we have three matters that were noticed today. Senate File 62, Legislator Healthcare 2, Senate Joint Resolution 8, Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account, and Senate File 158, Public Employee Retirement Plan Contributions. 158 was not read in. We can certainly discuss it, but we can't vote on it. First up is Legislator Healthcare 2. This was a bill sponsored by Management Council, and throughout those deliberations, former Speaker, now Senator Barlow, was on Management Council, and so he will be presenting the bill. And Eric, it's to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So this bill was first sent to the Rules Committee, of which, of course, the good chairman and the minority member of this committee were also on, so they have seen this before, certainly have. In that committee, it was, basically a review of the bill. It comes to you because it does have a fiscal note. Obviously, it has a cost, and that cost is borne by the employer. So the legislature as an employer, or members of the legislature, would be bearing that cost. And of course, there's a fiscal note on the back of that. So Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want me to walking through the bill, what the bill does is there's currently an exception in legislature, in the statute, for members of the legislature participating in life, health, accident, or hospitalizations. This would include legislators. And then it goes through, there's a definition of legislators, and then we go into how it's actually accomplished, and that's on page 4. And then, of course, section 2 goes into how it's done, and then section B would be A&I's role in promulgating rules, determining what how to both cover legislators when they're not earning enough to have it deducted from their pay, et cetera. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know what else you would want, but I think it comes back to the fiscal note, and the fiscal note, the employer share is what we would put in our legislative bill, what we put in all of our expenses. Right now, I don't believe, and I'm sorry, Director Robrecht isn't here, but I don't think if this bill were to come into effect, I don't believe there would need to be any addition to the current bill, or our current legislation, because we have so much saved monies for other reasons. But like I said, I apologize, the director isn't here, but there is no actually appropriation in the bill, and that's why I'm tending to lead there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be glad to stand for any questions, most of which I probably can't answer.
Thank you.
On the fiscal component.
Thank you. Committee? I've got one and I don't know if you can answer it. If legislators were treated as regular half-time employee, I don't know what the premium is, but it might be you'd have to write a check to the plan every month. I don't know if your legislative salary would even cover half the premium.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Hayes from A&I is here, and he can probably give some actual numbers to talk about it. And actually, that is true. Right now, when we're in session, there's probably adequate pay to be able to cover that. But when we get to April, May, where there are very few committee meetings, let's say, then there would be a deficit. This would allow, the way the structure is, would allow the A&I to go into you would have to allow them to pull out of withdraw some kind of accounts to cover that cost. So it does anticipate that sometimes, some parts of the year, there will be adequate within your pay to withhold, and some points of the year there will not be, and they have to have a mechanism to accomplish that.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else on the committee? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I don't understand why there isn't an appropriation. Is it because it's non-administrative impact, or looks like it's $1,700,000, $1,400,000? Looks like there's some money involved here, but there's no appropriation from it's got to be the legislature paying that employer side, doesn't it?
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
So I think there's two answers to that. One, the effective date I got to make sure I get I'm on the right
2023.
bill. The effective date would be the last half of the biennium, of the current biennium, which we fund ourselves on a biennial basis, just like we do the state. And I believe that we also have a contingency fund within the legislature that is basically I think it's $500,000. And then we have savings that we have also. So I think there's multiple ways this can be funded. Now, to be clear, Director Obrecht isn't here, but if this were to pass, at some point, we may need to revisit that, have that discussion about bringing an appropriation into the legislative fee bill.
Yeah, there'd be reversions from the feed bill is what would fund it initially.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I believe that covers it, but I wish Director Obrecht was here to confirm that to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also think that, Mr. Chairman, what this bill does, look at some of the assumptions of how many legislators are actually enrolling and where this fits onto, that's just the average. There will be folks that are in different circumstances. They have employer insurance, they have Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. So we also can't, the assumptions are what give you those numbers. I don't know that we can abide by those assumptions.
Well, if you're assuming 81 out of 93, I would think that would be on the high side. Yeah, okay. Anything else? Senator Rothfuss.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. My apologies for being late.
You're fine.
I tried 3 rooms prior to texting and finding out where you actually are. So should have tried here first. My apologies. With regard to, Mr. Chairman, why there is no appropriation, the cost as calculated would effectively come out of required appropriation for the feed bill moving forward. And it honestly might be appropriate for us to contemplate what that appropriation would be, but it is hard to speculate, as I think I just heard in the conversation, that it's all estimates, and until there's a sign up, it'll be hard to figure out what that number is.
All right, anything for these two gentlemen, committee members? All right, anything further before we take agency comment?
Mr. Chairman, so to be clear, this bill was one of 2 proposals that were before Management Council, and those that were on Management Council recognize that. One was to treat members of the legislature as employees, and therefore the legislature would pay the employer portion. The second proposal, which was not considered but was also on the table, was that no money come from the legislature, that anyone that wanted to participate in that pay their full way. So basically they have access to the plan, but not the employee share being remitted by the employer, i.e. the Wyoming legislature. So this is the one that advanced, but I do want to be clear to the committee that there was another proposal that would have had, limited, almost no impact, fiscal impact, except for maybe some administrative costs for LSO and for A&I to administer it, but no premium type of a contribution. So I want to be clear about that. So there was another option, but this is the one that Management Council moved forward with, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Any agency comment? Mr. Hayes, did you have any comment on the legislation?
I was here just to be available for questions.
I've got one for you. So, Mr. Hayes, do you have a copy of the bill and the fiscal note?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Ralph Hayes. I'm manager of the Employees and Officials Group Insurance Program. Yes, I do.
So looking at the fiscal note, this estimate of 81 legislators or 87%, is that from your department or was that LSO fiscal that came up with
Mr. Chairman, this was a combination. They worked with me and we made an assumption on a percentage out there, trying to be more conservative on a high side, knowing that these funds would be reverted if they were not used. Because as mentioned before, this is something brand new and it's very difficult to understand how many individuals would actually enroll in this program. It is a fairly generous program. We do encourage the employer contribution, so you're treated like any other employee, because we do worry about adverse selection, where the only people who would enroll would be individuals who find this plan to be richer and maybe with a health concern. So we actually like the fact that this does have an employer contribution. You're treated just like any other employees. And just one other thing, as far as collecting a premium, we do suggest that it just be handled through a payroll deduction, excuse me, not a payroll deduction, but through individuals' checking accounts like we do for
Oh, I see.
retirees, to be consistent, so we're not switching back and forth, because that would be an administrative nightmare.
Makes sense. So on that question of adverse selection, do you have any way of estimating whether that would impact or is the group so large that it would be negligible?
Mr. Chairman, on an individual basis, it can impact the plan from the standpoint, I just saw a one-day cancer treatment. There was a bill in excess of $1 million. So can it? Yes. But however, when we're dealing with 38,000 members, that can be absorbed fairly easy. But even though we do like the fact that there's no adverse selection with any one group, for example, when we do have like the city of Casper, who came on board with the plan, they're subject to the same rules, the same minimum employer contribution. That way we get the same general results as far as enrollment's concerned.
Okay. And then for there's 3 types of plans, I think: employee, employee spouse, employee family. What is the current total premium?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I did not come prepared for that. There's quite a wide range of premium, which is available on our website. But it does range for a family on the lowest deductible options, right around $2,400 a month for a family plan. And the single plan's a little over $1,000.
Okay, that gives me ballparkish. Anything else for Mr. Hayes? Senator
Mr.
Anderson?
Chairman, is there a chance that Medicare legislators would opt for this program instead of their Medicare?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, yes, there's a good possibility of this. Only at that point in time, this plan would be primary, and your Medicare policy, your Medicare would be secondary. That's the part of being enrolled in a group insurance. So yeah, absolutely, that is a possibility, because you would be considered to be an active employee by definition within this bill. So yes, I do expect Medicare eligible senators and representatives to enroll in this plan.
Okay.
Senator Nethercutt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not that you know these numbers directly, but wouldn't that cost be significantly higher for a member who was Medicare eligible but then chose the state health insurance plan? I think likely with no family of dependents, that's about $25,000 a year is my recollection from the interim from Management Council. Any thoughts on the comparison of those costs?
Mr. Hayes?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercutt, generally, the older you are, the more medical services you use. So yes, the cost for somebody.
If you're lucky.
I will grant you that.
Plan B is you don't need anything because you're gone.
On average, we'll put it that way, the 20 and 30-year-olds don't use a lot of health care. Those of us in excess of 45, it starts ratcheting up more and more. And we do have active employees with all the participating entities who are in excess of 65, and this plan is still primary. But on average, yes, they are more expensive than somebody who is younger.
Follow up? Anything else for the agency? All right, thank you, Mr. Hayes. Any other agency comment? Do we have a public comment? Anyone from the public here to comment on this bill?
Chairman Kinski, there's no one on the line.
Okay, I'll close public comment. It's to the committee. Moved. Moved and seconded. Discussion? Discussion? All right, call the roll.
Senator Anderson.
No.
Senator Garou.
Aye.
Senator Nethercott. No. Senator Salzar.
No.
And Chairman Kinsky.
No. So that
Chairman
just,
Kinsky,
all that does is that just strips the appropriation, correct? No. Yeah, we're just on the appropriation. Yeah, okay. Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, next bill for our consideration is Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account Spending Limits. Senate Joint Resolution 8, and I believe we have one of the co-sponsors, Senator Hicks, here. Welcome, Senator Hicks.
Mr. President, so just a little bit of background on this bill. And my time in the legislature, every year it seems like I hear a conversation or a debate on what the intent of the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account was as far as how much we should spend. We have no spending policy on it. There's really no guidance and statutes on it, but it's always been anecdotally said at one time it's supposed to last 10 years, or it should guarantee that we have enough money for 3 bienniums or 4 bienniums. And so, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, this is really just an attempt to establish so everybody, including the legislature and everybody in the state of Wyoming, knows what the spending policy is on our rainy day account. So it just goes in as it's a proposed constitutional amendment because, as we all know, anything that we put in statutes that says it's inviolate is we can't bind the hands of future legislators. So the only way, if you really want to bind future legislators' hand, is do it through a constitutional amendment. So, Mr. Chairman, all this does is go in and says at the beginning of the fiscal year, you determine how much is in the LSRA, and at that point in time, you can't spend any more than 25% of the total in any biennium. I did run a kind of a stress test in the last 12 years. The lowest we've been is $1.1 billion, and we're looking at upwards of $2 billion is approaching the top. So basically that says is you could spend $300 to $500 million out under the LSRA in any biennium. But if you want to go beyond that, you have to declare a fiscal emergency, and it would take 3/4 vote of both bodies to spend more than that out of the LSRA during any biennium. Mr. Chairman, that's the bill. That's the resolution. It's not a bill because it's a proposed constitutional amendment.
Committee members, questions for Senator Hicks? I have one. I would hope this wouldn't happen, but the legislature could just stop putting money into the LISRA and create another account and run it all into there and continue to operate with it like they do now with impunity. But is there anything stopping that?
Mr. Chairman, there's not anything from stopping the legislature from creating coffee cans everywhere.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
kind of been a historic practice, and my anticipation is that's not contemplated at all in this bill, but there would be nothing to stop them from doing that.
Is there, and I know it's not in the bill now, but did you contemplate actually making the LISRA a statutory, a constitutional fund and requiring that the certain amount of funds run into it to build it to these levels, or?
It doesn't contemplate any constitutional funds. Currently, anything in excess of the general funds and some of the other mineral royalties automatically spill into the LSRA at the end of each fiscal year. So that's where that money comes from. We don't appropriate into there. It's just a flow mechanism. And so that's where that money winds up. And so this just puts a spending limit on what we can do with it.
Okay, and of course, we're looking at the appropriation, and the only appropriation here is just the cost of placing it on the ballot.
Yeah.
Is what I see.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman, but this would be the committee of origin for this joint resolution. It was assigned to this committee. This is not a re-referral.
Oh, we're the primary,
So you are the originating committee on this bill.
okay. Okay, anything further for Senator Hicks?
So my budget busting speech about $16,000, I can just put that one away now.
All right. Do we have any agency comment? Any agency comment, any public comment?
No, sir.
Okay, anything else, Senator Hicks, before we take it to the
No,
committee?
that's it, Mr. Chairman.
All right,
It's a
I'll
pretty
close.
simple concept.
I'll close comment and it's to the committee. I'll move the bill. All right, bill dies for lack of second, I guess.
I'll second.
Okay, moved and seconded, discussion. Discussion, clerk will call the roll. Oh, please, sorry. I looked twice. and the
No,
third
I'm
time
sorry,
it
I
was green.
apologize, I was just a little slow. Mr. Chairman, I guess I read this and I understand what the intent, where we're going is. But then I just think about my last 6 years here. We cut budgets. We put more money into permanent funds than by act than I think any legislature has in any time before, when it was just going in naturally flowing in because the revenues were that high. We've cut employees. We have been as fastidious with dollars as I think anyone could be. So I just don't see this. I don't see why now a 2/3 vote to go into a spending policy that we haven't exceeded, to be honest. I just don't see that. I don't see the need. I think that, I think we're selling ourselves a little short. I think that we have been good stewards. I think we have been, and I frankly feel good about a lot of my votes on those, to be honest. And been taking the wise counsel of the good majority floor leader on a lot of those. So I'm a no on this because, like I say, I think that, bodies have taken this seriously, have taken budgeting seriously, and they'll continue to do so. We have disagreements every now and again on amounts in this, but 2/3 vote is, I guess it comes from maybe being on the short end of a supermajority for every year that I've been here. I certainly don't mind that, but we need to put a supermajority on top of a supermajority, I guess. In other words, if you guys can't get your own caucus to go with this, I don't know how the two of us are going to change you. So, that's just kind of the way I feel about it. I just think it's not necessary. I think we sell ourselves short by doing it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I don't like the idea of tying the hands of the future legislators. This is tying their hands that they can only take 25% of the account. They might need to take 30% of the account. I just don't like the idea of limiting them by amendment or otherwise. So I'll be a no also. Thank you.
Further? I'll be a yes to get it out onto the floor. I have done some work with fiscal staff in terms of what other states have done in defining the edges of their rainy day funds. And I'm looking at the title. I think I might bring an amendment to clarify it a little bit further and actually make the LISRA dedicate the revenues that go into it now so that they could not be diverted and created as a true rainy day fund. So I don't know that I'll do that, but I'd like to have the option, so I'll be an aye. Senator Salazar. Oh, Senator Nethercutt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I agree with the chairman that I understand where this joint resolution is going. I just don't think it's the right avenue and think it's too short-sighted, that there's a smarter way to accomplish what we're trying to do. There's always this criticism about the rainy day fund not being used for rainy days, but instead is using as a stabilization reserve account for legislators' budget appropriations, right? And it's a matter of semantics. So I find that argument a bit hollow, or the concern hollow. because, as Senator Guru pointed out, we can just create another account with a different purpose, obviating and this entire joint resolution, getting around the 2/3 vote. So if we really want to have a rainy day fund or a legislative stabilization reserve account, as the chairman pointed out, with sidebars associated with it, let's do that. But I do share also Senator Anderson's concern about tying the hands of future legislators based on how much can be used in the stabilization reserve account. There may be a circumstance that requires them, the most fiscally conservative legislature, that requires them to use more funds, and that should be readily available and shouldn't work differently than any other budgeting principle or account. And so for that, I'm a no. But I appreciate the effort and understand the intention and look forward to the good chairman bringing a bill of his own in the future.
Senator Salazar.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. I'm a yes vote on this bill. I actually think on the floor of the Senate, there would be support for this. I really do. And I think it's something that we do need to look at. So I'll be a yes vote.
Okay. Anything else? Call the roll.
Senator Anderson.
No.
Senator Guru.
No.
Senator Nethercott. No. Senator Salazar.
Aye.
And Chairman Kinsky.
Aye.
3 noes and 2 ayes.
All right, that bill fails. All right, thank you, Senator. Okay, I'll open a hearing on public employee retirement plan contributions. This was a bill that was worked thoroughly in Joint Appropriations Committee. The committee voted to sponsor it, assigned it to the Senate, and rather than replow that ground, I'll open it up for Mr. Swindle to give us some more feedback on the bill. I noticed that the exhibit has been revised a bit. Welcome, Mr. Swindle. We won't be voting on it today. We're just taking testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm David Swindell, the Executive Director of the Wyoming Retirement System. I did provide the committee with a handout for this hearing. I think you all have it. Anybody who wants a handout, if you want to follow along, we have a little bit of an audience. Ron? Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I did that. The information here is the same as you heard in the joint session. I just simplified it a little bit to take out some of the other alternatives that the JAC was exploring and neck it down to just what this bill does. I'll quickly go through the handout, and then I'll sit for any questions that the committee may have. In summary, this is Senate File 158. It is a bill to increase the employee and the employer contribution rates for the public employee pension plan. It increases the employer rate in the PE plan from 9.37 to 9.87% of salary. It increases the employee contribution rate by 50 basis points as well, from 9.25% to 9.75. The bill appropriates a little more than $6 million to fund the general fund employer expense for the state of Wyoming, colleges and university, and K through 12 education. It does improve the finances of the public employee pension fund with an additional annual contributions of $9.4 million each from employees and employers to total about $18.8 million this year. It accelerates the projected 100% funding to 2035. 3 years sooner, and improves the 30-year projection from 130% to almost 141%. A little improvement of a little more than 10%, 10.6 if you do the math. Most importantly, Mr. Chairman, I'd point out it materially improves the robustness of the plan in the face of adverse investment experience. And there's a chart to kind of illustrate that, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. This proposal emanates from Governor's Letter number 16, where the governor proposed a 1% contribution increase all on the employer side. He did that because out of 8 WRS pension plans, the PE plan has the lowest funding ratio We're currently at 77%. And it has by far the largest component of our unfunded liability. We have $2.8 billion across all those plans, but $2.5 billion of it is in this plan.
Billion,
Billion.
2.5
2.5 billion.
billion unfunded liability.
Correct.
And 2.8 billion?
2.8 across all 8 defined benefit plans.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For purposes of the public and this committee, can you please just further explain what that means to have a $2.5 billion unfunded liability? Just on layman's terms.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, thank you very much. I might also refer you to page 2 of your handout where it's got some actual numbers. There's a table there that has the contribution impact, and following that, it talks about funded ratios, and it gives you the numbers of where that 77% comes from. And you'll see that that's a calculation of $8,389 million, which is the current actuarial value of our assets. And you divide that by 10 billion, really 10.9 billion. That's the estimated present value of all the liabilities that the actuaries estimate that we have. What you do is you, for each person that's either a new employee now or a retiree we're paying now, the actuaries estimate what's your cash flow going to be out year by year, and then you discount that back to present value using the system's assumed rate of return, which is 6.8%. That's where that $10.9 billion number comes from. I should note that there's 2 ways to calculate a funding ratio. This is the actuarial funding ratio and the one we use in the board to really manage the pension funds, because that actuarial value of assets is a smooth value. We only book 1/5 of the investment gains or losses each year because we know that markets will be volatile. Right now, market value is about $9.4 billion. We're about 86% funded on a market value basis. We don't pay too much attention to that because we know that markets will be volatile. And in fact, in the last year, we have seen that we're going to have a loss this year, and we're going to use most of that $1 billion cushion. So that's how that number is calculated, and that's what we mean. It's desirable for a fund to have all of the money on hand today to actuarially pay all of the benefits that we project in the future. Although it's a perpetual fund, if you never get to 100%, the fund still survives. But it also means that you have more investment earnings because you have more money in the market to invest, and that's the lowest cost of the plan, is to be 100% funded.
Follow up, Senator Nethercott. Okay, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, isn't there a kind of a rule of thumb of what percentage? You know, we're talking big dollars here and everything. It really sounds bad, but isn't there a percentage level that you're supposed to be at with these that we're maybe approaching, or maybe we're exceeding? I'm not sure what that percentage is, but at 77%, are we below that rule of thumb?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, there was an article here now about 8 years ago that asserted that 80% was a healthy funding level for a typical pension plan. That number really doesn't have too much in basis, because to me, it's all about position, direction, and speed. Position, you're 77%, maybe a little closer on a market value basis, you're right there. But it's more important as to what direction you're going. Are you going up? Are you going down? You give me a fund that's 100% funded, but if it's going to project to lose ground, you have a problem. If you have a fund that is 10% funded, but it's going in the right direction, and I've seen some funds like that, you may have applied the right medicine and you're okay. The issue in the current Wyoming plan is probably more of an issue of speed. It has relatively good assets. And those are under pretty conservative assumptions. We've reduced the rate of return from 8% to 7.75 to 7, now to 6.8. We've applied the most recent actuarial assumptions. We're assuming people are living longer. We're assuming generational mortality where each generation lives longer. But still, we're stuck in the mid-70s. We have been for the last decade. That's where most public pension plans have been in the United States. We're not an exception to that. This plan is incredibly median when you look at the benefit levels, the funded ratio, just about everything except maybe contribution rates, where we're a little shy. Nationally, the median's about 21%. Every plan's different. Everybody has to figure this out on their own. But I should tell you that our actuaries would prefer that the contribution rate be higher by almost 2%. There's a thing called an actuarially determined contribution rate, which is the recommended rate to amortize the unfunded liability within the board's funding policy. And that right now would be 1.99% higher than the present rate, or about 2% shy. Now, they say that if you hang on to this market value cushion that I talked about, that you may be okay with the present rate. But Mr. Chairman, I would point out that that's kind of using hope as a method. And in fact, we already know that we've used up most of that cushion. There's a reason that we pay attention to actuarial value of assets and not market value of assets. So this is one of those cases where I think you have to say that the actuaries are probably correct. And it would be a wise investment by all of us to make a contribution increase, acknowledging that that is a cost on employers and employees. And that's always the rub, of course. I would point out that the I'll call it $19 million that would accrue to the fund next year if this bill were to pass, in 10 years, that's going to grow. It's going to be twice as much. And the second year, that does the same thing. This is all about compounded long-term returns, 20, 10, 20, even 30 years out. And a little more money today will result in twice as much money or 4 times as much money 10 and 20 years from now.
The 18 million is a biennial or an annual number?
Mr. Chairman, that is an annual number.
Okay. Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, what happens when we're overfunded then? It looks like we get to 102% in 2051 or 2052, somewhere in there, we get pretty well overfunded. Would there then be a decrease for the employees and their rates, or what happens then?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, good question. Politically, in the pension business, some say that the most dangerous thing to be is overfunded because people want to reduce contribution rates or increase benefits.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, though, the fund would be so well funded that the legislature would be in a position to consider modifying the rates, or, as we said, sometimes increasing the benefits. Danger there because once you increase the benefits, it's very hard to take them back.
They did that with IRA in the mid-90s. They discontinued the contribution.
Right. A better method, if you were ever to get that way, is the method that I saw work in Idaho. That plan at that point was like 126% funded, and there was pressure to reduce contribution rates and pressure to increase benefits. The retirement board recommended to the Idaho legislature, and the legislature agreed, that this was a one-time market event. The year is 1999, by the way, and markets were running very high, and they were concerned that this was a one-time market event. So what they agreed to do was, okay, they paid attention to the politics, and they lopped off 13% of the fund. It was more, it's several billion dollars. Their fund was about $14 billion at the time. They took 13% of those actuarial assets, reduced the fund to 113%. They judged the 13% being an adequate cushion for a market loss. Turned out not to be the case. The 2001 recession was deeper than that, but the thinking was good. And they took that $13 million and they gave everybody a lump sum refund. Employers got a refund. They just got a credit and didn't pay as much contribution rates for the next few months. And individuals, all the members of the plan, got a refund. And they got the refund in the form of a deposit to their deferred compensation account, which Idaho did not have at the time, but they established it. So what they did is they gave everybody, presto changeo, now you have a 401k sidecar. It's a 401k, not a 457 by virtue of some grandfathering things. And Anyway, it works very much like our 457 plan. A deposit to that, everybody had an account suddenly, and there was money in it. And the default investment was the Percy base fund, Percy being the Public Employees Retirement System of Idaho, a diversified fund. And that's the way it worked. And they also fully funded the startup costs of that DC plan for 10 years. So I invested in that plan because I was an employee of Idaho at the time, or a city in Idaho, and I didn't pay any fees for 10 years. I didn't work there in 1999. I got there a year after that, so my city clerk always kidded me that she was a beneficiary of what they called gain sharing, and I was not, and she thought that was appropriate. But that was the argument that we had between her. I still remember she's a great person.
So I've got a couple.
Anyway, that's how it worked. So I would encourage, when you get to that point, should we get to that point, that the legislature would consider certain one-time lump sum things rather than increasing ongoing benefits, which is a perpetual promise, or cutting your throat on contributions.
I want to circle back to Senator Anderson's question, but before I do, I just want to confirm a couple of things. The this graph on page 1 on the front looks to me to be identical to the graph on the third page. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The graph on the first page just has some circles on it.
Okay. And then turning to page 2 and page 3, the graph on the left, that's the one that says standard experience, but you said your actuaries are concerned that it's not very robust, that it couldn't withstand the rigors of a downturn.
Right, and that's why we modeled an adverse experience of negative 5.5%, which is where we were at the end of November. And you can see that under the current contribution rates, you're not going to achieve 100% in 30 years.
And what
you'll be
was
at
our
91%.
actual? That was 5.5 as of the end of November. What did it end up being actually?
We think when all of the dust settles for the end of December, which is when we measure this, it's going to be close to -7. December was not a very good month.
Oh. It's full of good news. Okay, and I'm circling back to Senator Anderson's question. If you could, I mean, your target is 100%. It'd be nice if you could give us something from, an actuarial journal or something that says that, because when I was on the retirement board, or else it's on JAC, one of our colleagues said, well, as far as I'm concerned, 80% is fully funded and we ought to be able to raise the benefit or something or other. I mean, he was dead set that was fine. We didn't need to get to 100. And since then, I haven't seen anything that says it makes sense that 100% would be the goal, but just in case we get that on the floor, I'd like to have something authoritative to be able to hang my hat on for 100%.
Mr. Chairman, I can do a little research on that. I believe the National Association of State Retirement Administrators endorses the goal of 100%, while acknowledging that a perpetual fund doesn't necessarily need to get to it, and a fund that is less than 100% is not necessarily in trouble. It much depends upon speed and direction.
Yeah. And so then has 100% been adopted by the WRS as its goal for each plan? Have they formally adopted that as a goal?
Mr. Chairman, the legislature has set certain funding goals and requirements for cost of living adjustments that endorse the 100% number. In statute, the retirement board cannot recommend a cost of living allowance increase until the fund reaches 100%, plus an allowance to pay for any proposed benefit, plus an allowance for adverse market conditions, which is ill-defined, but would be roughly 10 or 13%.
Yeah, could you send that statute to us? Oh, could you send the statute to us?
I can, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just used to looking at you. Okay, anything else for Mr. Swank? Senator Nethercott, or excuse me, for Mr. Swindell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a reminder, not necessarily to the director, but at our last joint meeting, I think I moved to have this become a formal bill draft for the purposes of publicizing it, for the public's review, all of the 34,000 active employees who may be required to kick in more of a contribution, and the 30,000 retirees, of course, and to get our arms around this more thoughtfully, recognizing this is a big move for what would be the Joint Appropriations Committee. But probably it's prudent to move this into an interim for a robust review and discussion. That was my thoughts about it, but to use this time in order to get us traction on that. So perhaps we're in discussion right now, and not to the director, but maybe thoughts about that. I know that the Joint Appropriations Committee in the interim discussed, evidently through the chairman, that you evaluated it carefully, but no bill draft was formally moved or no effort to take action in this legislative session. So I guess to the director on this piece, is there any harm in delaying action on this, or is it prudent to move it now, or thoughts about that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Nethercott, I think in the end, it's probably more important that everybody be comfortable with it and understand the budgetary impacts on both employees and the total on employers, and the total compensation impacts on employees. To say there's no harm to it is probably not quite accurate, because you lose 1 year of interest. And you do see a result. I think in the Joint Appropriation Committee materials, we were asked to analyze what it would be if you added a 2% contribution increase. And then I modeled for the committee what would happen if you split that over 2 years. And so there was a 1 year delay in the full implementation. And it does cost you about 1% funding 30 years out. Although that doesn't seem like a whole lot, there's a little bit. In contribution land, it's just a mathematical thing that sooner is better. I think everyone understands that. On the other hand, this did emanate from the governor's proposal of Letter 16. It did not come from the board. The governor felt, kind of paraphrasing between his messages to the legislature, that right now revenues in government are good. And this would be an investment, and it's, make some hay and put some money away while you've got it, preparing for when conditions aren't good. He always uses the ranching analogy, and that's very true. That would be the only difference.
Okay, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, we did not have a pension fund in our organization, but we dealt with several unions that did have them. And it was interesting to find what they considered 100% funded. Each one of them considered something different. And then what they were going to do with the money above 100% was always really interesting also. That was not well received by the members, what they were going to do with the extra money. So I like your approach for the state, that the employees get something out of that. Employer obviously should too, but the employees definitely should get something out of that. So thank you.
Let's see if there's anything else for Director Swindell before we go to public comment. Anything else? Open it up to public. Anybody from the public here to comment on this? Anybody online, Linda?
No, sir.
Okay, I'll close public comment. It's to the committee. For discussion purposes, I'll move the bill. We can't do that. Oh, excuse me. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I had a brain aneurysm. So let me go back to your point, Senator Nethercott. And I'll turn to Senator Guru to refresh my recollection, because things between being on the retirement board and being on JAC get a little fuzzy. How long has JAC been talking about this topic?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Well, we've been talking about retirement plans seemingly on a loop since I've been there, but this iteration of it, we were talking about different times over the summer.
Okay.
And talked about various ideas about it, but it's never, as discussed, it never got to bill draft form.
And I can speak for myself, and Senator Grew may weigh in. The reason it never got to a bill is we were all pretty tender from the last try. And you may recall that, was that 2 years ago?
Yeah.
We went out to the floor with a plan to try and turn the plan around, and you know, the outpouring of the employees that they didn't want to make any more contribution, which was leavened by the fact that they didn't really understand necessarily how dire the situation, or how important the shortage was. And so, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, we heard pretty loud and clear. That's why and with understanding about the potential cost over the 30-year period, I too like talking about this as an interim topic. But I also understand the needs of doing something, and that's why we asked for it to get drawn. I'm sorry it didn't get read in today, so we could talk about it more fully, or vote on it to see. But if I were to vote right now, I'd probably move to kick it to an interim topic and really have this committee walk through it all the way from the beginning. Look at all the options. I know these charts are great, but as I think a former representative mentioned, that doing a whiteboard, put in different numbers, see where it goes, see where it takes it. I too am, I'd love to get an actuarial person in and talk to us about, once again, with all due respect, but just talk about different ways of looking at this, because I, like the good chairman, have heard people say, yeah, you get to a certain percentage, you're good as gold. And I do. And I listen when I listen to the good director. It says, you're 2% off. All right, well,
How big a deal is that?
yeah, 98% of them on is pretty good. If we were playing baseball, we'd be in the Hall of Fame. Just go right to Cooperstown. But so somewhere in there, we don't want to short our employees. All of us want to do right by our employees. We're on the precipice of working a second year of pay increases to try to get the employees to market. That was another thought in my mind about, hey, let's take a look and see where this getting everyone to market is on the pay side, and see where that is before we even ask. Should we ask for employees to make a contribution? Have we done so much with getting our employees to market on pay that maybe that's a decent, fair question to ask? Or maybe we're going to find out that, the market just crossed us by again, and we see all these new numbers, and asking the employees to do something may not be as equitable as we think. Or there might be various thoughts in between. I just think time is going to tell us that a little bit, that things we don't know right now, where those pay increases, and we don't even know if those are going to pass. That's the other part of it. I'd be reluctant to say, okay, let's have a 50-50 split right now, and then all the market pay increases that we've talked about all fall by the wayside. Which very well could happen. Maybe then that wouldn't seem like such a great idea at the end of the day.
Senator Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, I disagree with the senator from the whole country. I don't need to study this anymore. I know the difference between doing it now and doing it later. We keep delaying this. It means more and more for the employees to have to pay in. If we can get it early and get it often, like we're trying to do, then they don't have to have so much paid in. And it just delays the agony and the defeat. If we do it this year or next year, if they're gonna be vocal and harass us, yeah, let it be, let it happen. But let's get this done. Thank you.
Senator Nethercott, I'd be in favor of an interim if I thought it would bring any more attention to the issue than, we're a committee, we meet, and the average employee goes to work, comes home, they're just not tuned in, but when they hear something more is going to come out of their paycheck, they get active real quick. The only reason it's here is there are other members of the committee for whom hope springs eternal felt that because there were two substantial pay increases, 0.5% would be noticed, but it would be far less painful. I'm considerably less optimistic, just when you look at the condition of pension plans all across the United States, it's, it just, how do you get them to, can the government afford to fund it all? And can you get the employees to put a contribution in? And it just, I'm not very optimistic. And the last time was just, I will tell you, I've stood for some tough votes and I've taken some abuse, but that trying to get the pension plan solvent was just brutal for me personally. And I don't know why, because I've been beat up on so many things, but I distinctly remember a conversation with a young man who was just livid. And I said, honest to God, I tried to do the right thing, but I have to tell you, it's not my problem, it's yours. You're very young, I'll be dead. When it's time for you to collect on the pension, good luck. Because I'm not gonna go catch a spear one more time. And yet, here I am, looking at it one more time, but maybe this time's a charm. But tell me, with the interim study, tell me how you think, how would that benefit it? Just for our edification, or do you think you could get employees educated enough to maybe support it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just think there are, the hope springs eternal piece. I think it's important to recognize if we get the employee compensation through, right? There are those clearly that will not support the budget no matter what, because there's appropriations in it. And that will never be a popular one. So I do think that in light of the concern about most of the state employees not even being at market, further deductions from their paycheck is a legitimate concern when they're also dealing with inflation. I get the need to make sure their pensions are fully funded, and that is in their best interest in the long term, as opposed to paying for a dozen eggs, which is certainly a difficult concern right now, but that's what they're faced with, right? And I use that a dozen eggs loosely because they're overpriced, and that would be likely also an additional retirement contribution plus. So I just have those reservations and concerns. Mr. Chairman, if you simply are bruised from previous experiences and think it's prudent to move forward, I cannot be bruised anymore. And so I will help that fight, and it will have no effect.
Yeah, I just as well take it out to the floor and see what they do with it as put it onto an interim, but we may end up putting it onto an interim anyway. Okay.
I hope not. Okay, so we're gonna leave that bill in the packet.
We're gonna leave that bill in the packet.
We're gonna work that next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll declare anything further from the committee? I'll declare the meeting adjourned.